In the early 1970s, American road racing was in its golden age, and the Trans Am series was the ultimate battlefield. Factory-backed pony cars fought for dominance on twisty circuits, trading blows race after race to see which American manufacturer would come out victorious. Ford ran the Mustangs, Chevy the Camaro, and Dodge the Challenger. But in 1970, the most unlikely contender stormed into the fray. One that didn't come from the Big Three or Motor City at all, but rather hailed from Kenosha, Wisconsin. It came from the American Motors Corporation, who, after years of swearing away from the performance wars, had decided to throw their hat back in the ring. With less resources and less money, AMC defied all odds and built a racer out of their Javelin that wasn't just competitive, but it was eventually dominant. How though? See, for most of its history, American Motors had deliberately stayed out of the performance spotlight. Formed in 1954 from the merger of Nash and Hudson, AMC positioned itself focusing on economy and practicality. While Detroit's Big Three escalated the muscle car wars throughout the 1960s, AMC stood on the sidelines, wary of burning precious resources on high-risk, high-cost performance ventures. They wanted to stick to the simple cars that they were building and see if they could weather the storm. But by the late 1960s, the writing was on the wall. Performance was selling. Young buyers wanted speed, and AMC didn't have it yet. AMC's image as the frugal family brand wasn't going to cut it anymore. If the company was going to survive, especially with its already smaller market share, it had to evolve. That meant getting serious about building cars that not only looked the part, but could back it up with performance to boot. As such, they created the Javelin. Released in 1967 for the 1968 model year as part of their repositioning strategy alongside the AMX. And as the first pony car AMC ever made, they knocked it out of the park with the Javelin. It was a really handsome car. It was smooth yet muscular, and it had its unique semi-fastback roof design on the back, with its aggressive twin Venturi front grille and its understated but striking dual hood scoops. It was a looker, and it was a far cry from the Ramblers of old. Under the hood, 3 different sized AMC V8s were available, as well as 2 inline 6s for the Javelin, with V8 power outputs coming in at 315 horsepower for the top dog 390 cubic inch motor, 280 horsepower for the 343 cubic inch, and 225 horsepower for the smallest V8, which was the 290. However, if AMC wanted to build their performance credibility from basically nothing, they needed to race these new Javelins. In 1968, a team including Ron Kaplan and Jim Jeffords prepared 2 Javelins for the SCCA Trans Am races to see if the Javelin had what it took. These cars were fully fitted to be competitive SCCA racers with a special 450 horsepower version of an AMC V8 that was punched out to 304 cubic inches, backed up with a 4-speed manual and all of the period racing goodies. And for a company that hadn't pushed for any real racing results before, the results were spectacular for the Javelin's first go. Drivers Peter Revson and George Fulmer managed to pull consistent 3rd and 4th places in multiple races, usually just behind Mark Donohue's Camaro racing for the Penske Hilton team, and Shelby's Mustang that was driven by Jerry Titus. It was such a shock that the 1968 Javelin team earned the moniker the Cinderella team. And in order to celebrate these events, AMC decided to produce a heavily tricked out Javelin road car based on the special paint job of the car that Revson drove throughout most of 1968. These road cars were painted with a base of frost white, and then the front half was painted Matador red, and the rear third was painted Commodore blue. Only 100 of these cars would ever be built, and they were known as the Javelin SST Trans Ams, and they would be produced for the 1970 model year. This 100-car run was a hard cap chosen intentionally before production, as AMC execs knew that each car would have to be sold at a net loss, and that the sole intention of these cars was to show off the newfound racing of the Javelins. It was more of a marketing ploy than anything else. But compared to the base model 1970, these SST Trans Am road cars were a wild improvement. It got the potent 390 that came with 315 horsepower initially, but they were able to bump it to 325 horse at 5,000 RPM and 425 foot-pounds of torque at 3,200 RPM for these special cars. They were fed by a 4-barrel Autolite carburetor, and they were based on the 390s from the previous year with a more aggressive cam and some better heads, which explained the modest power bump. And of course, the Trans Am models also had functional hood scoops for a ram air induction effect as well. There is actually an interesting fact about this car worth noting though. It's that this 1970 Trans Am SST cars, these ones had the 390 in it, which was an engine that was way bigger than SCCA rules allowed. If you think of the Boss 302 Mustang and the Z28 Camaros, which also ran in the Trans Am series, those production cars were offered with sub 305 cubic inch motors, as that's what the Trans Am series cars were limited to. And that's what the actual Trans Am racing Javelins ran. They had 304 cubic inch motors. But there was a rule change that happened that allowed manufacturers to de-stroke their normally larger commercially available engines. So that's what AMC did with the 390, hence why this bigger motor was fitted in this road car. Aside from the upgraded engine though, the 100 road-going Trans Am Javelins got every performance upgrade available for other models and then some. They had a Borg-Warner Super T10 4-speed manual with a Hurst shifter, a twin-grip limited slip differential with 391 rear gears, power disc brakes up front, power steering, Magnum 500 wheels with Goodyear Polyglass tires that were F70 by 14, extra heavy-duty suspension parts, a dual exhaust with chrome tips, and a better cooling system. Even with the bigger 390 and all these other performance improvements and creature comforts available, the Trans Am Javelin road cars were actually about 200 pounds lighter than a comparable Camaro, and their lower weight made up for the somewhat lower horsepower that the AMC cars had. The Javelin was surprisingly nimble and it handled well with good stability, which is partially what made it such a good racer. With only 100 of these road cars being made to commemorate the initial success of the race cars, it wasn't like everyone that wanted one could have got them, but thankfully there was a much more common Mark Donohue variant of the Javelin SST, which has an interesting tie-in to the Trans Am cars. As mentioned before, Mark Donohue was racing Camaros before this. Well, AMC was able to poach him and Donohue's car of choice switched to a Javelin. And to tie that in, they launched the Mark Donohue variants of the Javelins. Now, the Donohue models missed out on a few of the performance options that the SST Trans Am cars did, but they did have some unique badging and other options. They made 2,500 Donohue additions, partially to ensure that some parts, specifically the rear spoiler, were in compliance with the new SCCA rules that had came down after the Trans Am edition had been produced. And it's right around this time that all of these AMC Trans Am inspired models were hitting the showroom floors that the Javelin started to excel on the racing circuit. In 1970, the Javelins did well again racing, and around this time they actually made their body style change to the more voluptuous body of the 71 and later Javelins. And that's when things got crazy. Thanks to some better suspension geometry and the combined knowledge of a few years of racing under their belt now, in 1972, 1973, and 1976, these little AMCs that could won the entire Trans Am racing series outright. Coming from nothing to 3-time series winners inside of a decade was a remarkable feat for AMC, who always seemed to have the deck stacked against them. And it's this American underdog story that not only shook the Trans Am racing series, but also cemented the collector legacy of those 100 red, white, and blue SST Trans Am tribute cars that AMC offered. And while most of us may never be lucky enough to see one in person, at least you know of their significance if you haven't heard of them before. Sure, these AMC road cars weren't LS6 big block Chevelle fast, but they were unapologetically AMC. And that's all we could really ask for. But that concludes today's video. Hope you all enjoyed and learned something new. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me out. And as always, I will see you all in the next one, enthusiasts.